Hi, and welcome to the IBM Fast Track Your Data podcast series. I'm Dez Blanchfield, and I'm your host. And today, well, I should say tonight, it's about 11 o'clock at night, I have the pleasure of being joined in the studio by Lillian Pierson. Lillian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Des. I'm excited about this.
It's great to have you. We've been chatting for a while on Twitter about doing these, and so I should just highlight for folk listening that it's about 12:30 midnight here in Sydney, so I'm guessing it's about 9:30 p.m. your time in Thailand. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's nice to be able to catch this at the end of the day, and thanks for fitting me in so fast.
Oh, not at all. I really appreciate you responding so quickly. So a quick intro. You're huge on social media, in particular Twitter, where your handle is at Big Data Gal. You've got your own website and you do training courses. You've got a website, which I'll mention here, www.data-mania.com, where you describe your goal as being the challenge of making people awesome at finding and communicating data sites. And I read your background on your website. You described yourself as having become a data scientist from a career that was in environmental engineering, and that effectively you taught yourself coding and statistics that you needed to do data science, and that you moved into data science because you had an innate interest in finding hidden answers in data. That must have been a pretty significant transition from what you were doing prior to it, was it?
It was, but it was a natural transition because even before I graduated from engineering school, I was working as an intern, and in my first project as an environmental engineering intern was to develop a standard that would determine whether or not a lake bioremediation project had actually been effective. And then after that, they wanted me to build a database system where everyone could collaborate and enter their data into the same system for oil and gas cleanup projects. And then I was doing all this GIS and started doing automation work in GIS. That was before I even graduated engineering school. So although it's a big gap between environmental engineering design work and data science, there's a lot of areas that are kind of overlapping. So, yeah. And those were the areas I was always better at in environmental engineering. So there was some work to make the transition, but it wasn't a huge jump.
It's interesting. I don't think I've met a single person who's in data science in any form, whether it's from an engineering background or from a statistical background or just a pure math background, who's actually had the exact same pathway. So you mentioned you originally came from an engineering background, and particularly in environmental engineering. But then in your website, you talk about the shift being driven by the 2008 housing bubble collapse, or GFC as the rest of us in the world call it, and that you wanted to move into an area of work where essentially it offered abundant opportunities to do interesting and fun things and be a bit more flexible. And I remember seeing a quote there that you said something to the effect that you wanted to escape the 9-to-5 working in office space. What kind of, other than the GFC piece, which obviously was a big push, was there a particular aha moment or a eureka moment where you just sat there and thought, this is not for me, I want to do something different?
Well, yeah, I was doing design work in environmental engineering, and things had slowed down a lot in the sector because of the housing bubble collapse. I don't know that they've even recovered at this point. And yeah, it was during that time, I wasn't busy. I wasn't busy at work. And when I have just idle hands, I start thinking, I just wanted to be more engaged. I felt like I was wasting my potential, right? Because I didn't have enough work. And so I started thinking about, what other things could I do with my background? And that led me into patent. Like I wanted to do patent law. So I went to law school.
Oh, wow.
Thinking that would be another, because I was thinking it would be something that would that would fully utilize my background. I could just do an add-on and get a law degree and then do something that would allow me to work internationally. But then I found out what working in law is like, and I decided that wasn't a good way. And I fell into,
I'm not surprised. It's
that
not
I
a,
didn't like working in law. Yeah, no,
yeah,
wasn't
I
a
know.
thing.
That's a common thing. You also talked about on your blog, I was reading that you approached your employer at the time to provide you training in languages like Python and R scripting and a bit of background in stats and so forth, so you could solve more complex problems using traditional data science methods. But at the same time, you were effectively establishing your own business, Data Mania, as a side gig. What was the response to your boss at the time when you sort of said, "I want to learn more around the sort of the traditional data science methods and learn some languages"?
Okay, yeah. So that actually happened after I transitioned from an environmental engineering role, and I got a job doing GIS for development and support services for local government. And then, but they immediately had me in a business intelligence data analytics role, developing this data analytics project. And then when I said I want to learn Python and R so I could develop custom scripts for the team, I mean, they had absolutely no hesitation, and it was kind of a benefit that was included with the job anyway. So they were just really happy to have me doing that. And yeah, and then it was wonderful because once I learned how to do different types of scripting and analysis, then I could just automate a lot of the work that they had me doing manually, and then just make sure I have correct procedures for checking in case there had been changes that were made in the workflow prior to the automation. But then once I had automated a lot of the work I was doing, then my bosses had me start building things that either could automate some of the stuff they were doing, or just give them a level of intelligence, like a level of information that they
Right.
didn't have.
Yeah.
You know.
And were you building at the time? I mean, when we talk about writing things in scripting languages like Python and R, we're often sort of building things from ground up. Did you find yourself building modules and tools that you just started to build a library of capability and then grow on that? Or did you find yourself having to solve each problem uniquely every single time?
Mostly I was building scripts that solved specific problems. In other cases, I was scripting up modules that were already built because,
Right.
I mean, I learned Python through learning ArcPy
Okay.
because so it's like a Python scripting for ArcGIS. So in those cases, I was using modules that were already built and scripting them together. So it was kind of both. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun challenge, isn't it? Because often we're solving things that people might have solved in part, but what I love about the sort of things that we do, and I'm sure it's the same for you, many times we're sitting there, we're kind of one of the first people to solve the problem from that particular angle or that particular position, and I get quite a buzz out of that myself. So you take it. If we move forward a couple of years, you'd moved out of your sort of day job. You were working on Data Mania full time, and then from what I understand, you took off and did some traveling and ended up in Southeast Asia. Can you tell us a little bit about that and sort of how that progressed? And from what I understand, you then went and got married and settled down and now have a beautiful baby girl.
Yeah. So I already loved traveling, and it really made it a lot easier for me to actually leave the States at the beginning because it was lower financial overhead. So when I quit my job, it was like, okay, I didn't have to make as much money at first, and I could build my business. And so that was nice. And then I traveled. I lived a bunch of different places. I mean, I was probably, I don't know how many countries. I was traveling a lot, and I got kind of worn out of it
Right.
and felt like I thought at a certain point, maybe I'll just go back to the United States because it's quality of life. I wanted to have a certain quality of life, and I thought but then I thought, well, okay, where could I go that if I'm willing to, I was able to spend the amount of, pay US rates for everything. So where would I go that I could have the quality of life, a better quality of life? And so I actually came to, so I'm on an island in Thailand, and I'd been here before, and I knew it's not, it's not super, it's not always super inexpensive, but I just love it here. And so I thought, well, I'll just go back to Koh Samui and see about settling down there. And then I came here, and it's got everything I need. And then I met my husband, and yeah, now we have 2 properties here and a baby, and I'm pretty much settled here, but then I'm traveling all the time for work, for sure.
It sounds like you've got a dream life that some of us would just would give a left lung for. We've got a great life here in Australia and Sydney as well, but it sounds like your part of the world beats us hands down. You obviously end up in a scenario where you effectively work remotely for most of what you do. How do you find that whole challenge of sort of being a remote worker and such, in that you're in this beautiful remote space in the world, but most of your clients are probably outside of country or international?
But you mean, I don't, in what aspect?
Do you find it easy to sort of A, find the clients, I guess, but B, also just communicate with the clients and liaise with them, given they're probably in different regions, different time zones? In the general sense, because in my case, for example, I probably live 3 different time zones. I've got the Australian eastern seaboard, then I've got South Australia, which is 2.5 hours behind, and then I've got Western Australia, which is 3 hours behind. I've got people in Europe and people in the UK that are 14, 15 hours behind.
Yeah.
In the US, I've got East Coast, Central Time, Mountain Time, US time. And so I've got this constant challenge of juggling family life, my personal life, keeping fit, eating well, sleeping sensibly, and then actually still getting up at 3:30 in the morning to do meetings with folk like our friends at IBM. So I'm imagining you've probably got a similar challenge in that, you create content and training material for your website, but you also must have people around the world that you liaise with, and you're almost this permanently switched on remote worker, I guess.
Well, okay. So, I've been very lucky in that my clients have been very, hands off, and most of the work, unless it's getting close to when I have to deliver a product, we don't actually have meetings. It's just I have deadlines coming up in a few months, and I just deliver the products via email. So, for the most part, I don't really have much of a scheduling conflict, and I tend to actually work later just because my husband, he works on U.S. hours.
Okay.
But actually, yeah, and so I've been very lucky actually because in this sense, I haven't actually looked for work. Like none of the, it's just been one thing led to another, and I've found jobs, and so that's been great. But I'm actually now starting to look for contract, like consultant work.
Yeah.
And I haven't sought work in so long, and it's kind of
It's a fun challenge,
yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, I'm like, okay, should I? It's like it's very different. But I think people are pretty understanding. I don't know. I haven't gone very far down that route because I've got so much work already to do. But I'd like to be doing consulting work, and it just doesn't, just only doing the work that comes to you. Sometimes I think I want to do some other types of work. So
yeah, it's easy to get pigeonholed. I find that if I do that for a while, I get pigeonholed into an area, and then all of a sudden I realize I probably didn't want to go down that route in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, like my editor, who I love to work with, she's a wonderful lady, and she was saying, "Oh, you can write another book," and I just thought, you know what? Like I can write another book, but I want to do consulting. I want to do data science consulting work, and if I say yes to this book deal, then I'm not going to be able to do that because I'll be busy. So I just said, okay, even though I don't have any like consulting work lined up, I just said I can't take the book deal because I've got to, like, my goal is to move in a different direction instead of, just always, I want to be doing, not just teaching.
Speaking about your book, I'd love you to give it a plug. You wrote a book on data science. Tell us a bit about that.
Oh, Data Science for Dummies. I'm really excited. The second edition just came out a few months ago, and I wrote it to be a guidebook to people who are getting into data science or maybe working in a small area of analytics or something, to give them a broader overview of the entire data space.
Right.
And I just added a bunch of sections on machine learning and artificial intelligence and stuff like that. So, that's
how did you come to write a dummies guide on data science in the first place, just out of interest?
Oh, it was the most awesome experience ever. I was boarding a plane from Bangkok to Bali, which is Bali is like I'd never been, it was one of my dream destinations. And I got this random email right before I shut off my phone, and it was an editor asking if I wanted to, with the whole thing, like, we'll pay you this much, and like, this is your timeline, and do you want to write a book?
Wow.
I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so then it was just, as soon as I got off the plane, I was like, yeah, okay, I want to write a book. Yeah, I want to write this book for sure. So that's just how it happened.
That's amazing. It's funny how many things in our lives happen like that, where the timing's just right and it feels right, and other times things just don't feel right. I love your pink unicorn logo, by the way, but I suspect that it might get challenged a little bit when we're in Munich in a week's time around the mythical data scientist unicorn topic. But anyway, but I do love it. It's pretty cool. I hope that you're going to bring out a line of clothing with that logo on it at some stage. I'll proudly wear a pink unicorn on the front of a T-shirt. Now we're both heading to Munich in a week's time, which I'm really excited about, because we get to finally meet in person after sharing tweets and retweets and comments and whatnot. So I wanted to give a little shout out to the event we're heading over to, and then I've got a bunch of questions I'd love to get your insights and thoughts on, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the event is it's called Fast Track Your Data. It's in Munich. It's an IBM event. It's on June the 22nd. And if folk listening want to find out more, they simply just jump on their favorite search engine and search for the phrase "Fast Track Your Data." And the catch line is secure your competitive advantage with machine learning. And they've got a hashtag, which is #IBMML. They claim that it's going to be 8 hours. It'll change your life, whether you're there in person or live streamed online, or participating in some of the breakout sessions in person or digitally. And they've got an amazing TV media personality and news anchor, Kate Silverton, hosting it. It's an interesting new format, in fact, because unlike some of their mega events they host in Las Vegas or New York, such as the World of Watson or Interconnect and so forth, which I've been privileged to go to, this is more like a live TV show that runs for 8 hours with different breakouts. And they've got some amazing folk coming from the IBM team, which I'm looking forward to catching up with. Rob Thomas, who's the General Manager of IBM Analytics Platform, Mark Altschuler, who's the GM for IBM Business Analytics, Seth Dobrin, VP of, and I think he's also the CDO for IBM Analytics, that is, sorry. Dinesh Nirmal, who's the VP for the IBM Analytics Development. And of course, the famous Hilary Mason, who's a founder and data scientist at Fast Forward Labs and formerly at Bitly. Yourself, of course, which was fantastic, and yours truly. I'm looking forward to being there. And the event itself, just quickly, the topics they're talking about, they're going to be covering things like hybrid data management, unified governance, data analytics and visualization, data science, and the big topics, machine learning. And I was hoping that we could sort of do speed dating 60 seconds or less questions, if you're comfortable with that, on 6 or 7 key points that I sort of gleaned from the event and what they're looking to cover, because I'm really keen to get your thoughts and insights on them. Are you comfortable doing speed dating 60-second responses to some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
A bit of fun. So the first one, just to read through, is what your take on the unicorn data scientist meme is, and just the general topic of I think the aim for this event is to kind of dispel this mythical beast of a unicorn data scientist and talk about what they are. But what's your general take in 60 seconds or less on that whole unicorn data scientist meme?
Okay, so I wasn't aware that we were going to be trying to dispel the myth. But so when I saw this question, I did just a real quick internet search, and I found a quote from International Data Corporation. They came out with a quote in 2014 that said, there's 18.5 million people in the global workforce that know how to code, but actually 7.5 million of those people are just coding hobbyists. So what it really comes down to is 0.3% of the global workforce knows how to code. And if you think about data science, when you put it in perspective of that, data science is more than just coding. You also have to be, really good at math and statistics and have a subject matter expertise in a particular area. So it's far less than 0.3% of the global workforce. So I think that it's not completely outrageous to equate data science with the mythical unicorn.
I love that. I love the fact you've backed it up with statistics that guarantees the evidence that you're a data scientist. I don't know we're necessarily going to dispel the entire myth, but I think the aim is to highlight that, there's this meme that data scientists are unicorns, and absolutely you're right. They are often difficult to find. But I think one of the challenges around this concept of treating the idea of a data scientist as a unicorn is that oftentimes we've actually got somebody who's bordering on data science capabilities inside our organizations, and we just need to kind of give them the right tools and support and training, which I think is evidenced by your own background, and then they can
Absolutely.
do great things, right? So you're right.
I think that it's like not even the idea of finding these people with PhDs in computer science and filling all the data. It's not going to happen. You're never going to find enough PhDs in computer science to fill all the data science positions in the world, but you can equip the working professionals that know what they're doing in their own field with, basic coding and analytical skills enough that they can generate value. And I think that's the only way to skin the cat, because you're not going to get the numbers that are required from these, PhD and stats and stuff like that. It's kind of ridiculous, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And not only that, but I've found in my own experience that when I go into companies and we start talking about building a practice in data science of any form, it often reminds me of coming across a bank at one point when they had a room full of COBOL programmers that they effectively kept in the dark and threw food to occasionally to keep alive. And yet, in my experience, if we find somebody with any kind of SME, subject matter expertise in the business, it's far easier to give them the skills and tools and so forth to do data science type work than to take someone who comes from a pure analytical background or pure actuarial background and teach them
Absolutely
the vertical, right? So, as you said, taking a PhD and saying, welcome to insurance or wealth management or banking, you've got to figure that out. It's like, well, no, actually, we're better off finding someone with 30 years of banking and teaching them how to use Studio or the data science experience from IBM. No, I love that. That's a great takeaway. Second question then, and just to read through. So the question is, do you think data science is a team sport? Yes, no, maybe. Why? What's your 60-second takeaway on the idea? Is data science a team sport, or are lone wolves still a necessity?
I think that generating organizational value from data is a team sport. And I think that this all comes back to collaboration and collaborating across a platform. When organizations set up data science platforms where data engineers and data scientists and application developers can collaborate, they effectively reduce a lot of redundancies in their system where people are recreating the wheel, at their own station, and they make their workflows a lot more efficient. And so in that sense, I would say that data science is a team sport.
Great stuff. Third question, and just to read through. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on hybrid data management. And essentially, this is the sort of the topic between on-premises and hosted environments and data versus sort of in cloud, and the types of challenges that we might come across in that juggle of keeping some environments on-premises, and particularly data, and then at the same time using in-cloud services, whether it's machine learning in the IBM Bluemix Watson Cloud platform with their ML capability. Your short take on and general thoughts on the hybrid data management challenge with sort of on-premises and cloud, if you would.
Well, I think hybrid data management makes a lot of sense. And I'm no security expert, but I know enough about it to know that organizational leaders are not ready to host certain data sets on the cloud. Even if the cloud is more secure, there's a lot of hesitation there, and I don't know that that's going to go anywhere in the foreseeable future. However, there are a lot of products and services that an organization will not be able to develop and offer if they don't run cloud services. It's really a handicap not to run certain portions of your work on the cloud. So I think the idea of having hybrid data management really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, great. And I totally agree with the point there in that, the challenge, from the board and CEO downwards, the challenge to even just grasp some of the concepts that people are having to deal with. Now, I had this phrase a while ago that I'll throw at you where I was asked to describe the general state of the nation, and I said, look, I think the world we live in now, particularly for CEOs more than any, and the teams that support them, is so disruptive that the rate of change and the pace of change is such that we're having to sprint just to keep up. But the challenge is for most organizations, they're having to sprint in multiple races at the same time and often in different directions. And so even just grasping the challenge of, do I stay on premises or do I go to cloud, is a heady undertaking in any sense, let alone what do I do with the data between them all. So you're absolutely right. It's going to have to be a hybrid mix, and I don't know that anyone's got the silver bullet on it yet. My next question for you is around data governance, in particular, its impact on innovation. And the question is, do you think that data governance drives innovation? Yes, no, maybe why? And specifically, when I talk about innovation, I'm keen to get your insights on, whether we think that appropriately applied data governance and control around data might stymie people's access to that data and ability to innovate, or whether should it just be unconstrained, and what that might mean. But in short, does data governance drive innovation in your mind?
I think that any time that someone's forced to work and produce great results under a set of external pressures, they have to have a lot of ingenuity. And so stricter data governance standards are going to force organizations to have more innovative solutions. I do know that there are some really innovative tools that are being developed to right now to help companies meet increasingly strict data governance standards. So I guess I personally,
it's a curly one. It's a curly question, isn't it?
Personally, I'm not for. I don't like control standards, although they're necessary. I never like to feel controlled. But in that same token, when you increase restrictions on a certain space, it does drive innovation. It does, because people have to produce great results despite the fact that they have more restrictions. So they have to find more clever ways of doing it, which is what they're doing with these new tools.
It's interesting you say that, because that's actually a similar response that I had in a conversation today over a lunchtime phone call, where somebody in federal government was saying that they're finding that their teams are just coming up with new weird and quirky ways to solve problems because the hands are tied. And this person comes from a commercial background, and they've just moved into government in a CIO role. And they were quite astounded. They said, I can't believe how creative these folk are in federal government, because in an enterprise world, we kind of just got lazy. And I said, well, yeah, I think, as you've just said, when you are constrained in some ways, you have to get creative. You have to think differently, and it forces you to think long and hard about what data you've got access to and how you're using it and where it's going to.
Exactly.
And I think data governance is becoming, we were talking before we hit record here, but just to recap, when we think about data protection in general, particularly with, the historical environments or frameworks the European and American data shield, for example, and it has a few quirks where Switzerland wanted their own little twist on it, and the way that data is treated between America and Switzerland inside the EU-US data shield framework. And then in Australia, we've had since 1918 very strict privacy laws around protection of people and consumers and so forth, but specifically around the data and the treatment of their data around them. So privacy with regard to their name and their phone number and so forth. And obviously it's been modified with technology. And of late, we now have this notifiable breach addition to it, where if there's any form of data breach or any form of risk around your data, the organization not only has to notify you, but also the community people around you and the society as a whole, so that you can make an informed decision about whether you've been impacted or not, and then pursue them in various ways. And we've now seen this tsunami of impact. I don't think the world's fully appreciated the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. I think this is going to be bigger than Y2K, and that is that come March 25th, 2018, when it's actually put into force, organizations could be impacted up to 20-odd million euros, I think it is, per person per incident, or up to, I think it's 4% of a year's turnover. So it's a non-trivial impact that could break companies if they're not engineered or geared towards it. And I think that's going to have to drive innovation in a whole range of ways, because they're going to be forced to go back and look at what data they've kept, why they're keeping it, what's on tape, what's on disk, what's in the system, what's held in memory, what's in apps, who's got, the whole supply chain challenge of where's data moving. So I agree with you. I think it's going to definitely drive innovation, and I can't wait to talk about it more when we catch up next week with the team at IBM. Flowing on from that, the topic of data security, particularly in the context of collaboration, I find all kinds of interesting responses to this when we talk about collaboration in general around the world, because people have very different views on what collaboration is or is not. But in your view, what does data security mean in the context of collaboration?
To me, it means that you need to have a very secure collaboration platform, because any sort of peer-to-peer collaboration across a data science platform, it brings in risk for each technology component that is being utilized across the platform, and so without securing the platform,
well, the collaboration becomes more difficult the tighter the security is, right? But then at the same time, you've got to kind of open things up enough that people can share data and share models and share views and even scripts and tools, I guess, don't they?
Well, I'm just speaking from, I had a client and I helped with the platform, and I don't want to speak I guess I'll keep that, who it is, anonymous.
Of course.
Yeah, so what they were doing was they actually used the same security protocols that were inherent in each of the technologies that the platform integrated, and they just integrated the security protocols as well into the overall data science platform, so that it was not just secure in the same way that it would be, just in a native environment, but then it would be having double, triple, quadruple security, because it had all of the security protocols stacked up inside this data science platform. And the thing about it is that there's a lot of benefit that can come from working collaboratively and having your teams sharing the results, and not trying to recreate the wheel for every project that they work on. But without having the security covered, having a secure platform, the benefits are negated by the risk. So it's really important to have a very secure platform.
And I think it was about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, we saw an incident, a series of incidents, actually, a global rollout of risk in that, for a particular reason, which I won't go into now because it's still kind of under investigation, some 47,500 MongoDB backends fronted by SSL. So people thought they were secure because they were encrypted and that it wasn't visible. But their MongoDB backends were exposed to the entire world with no username and password, and the ports were wide open.
Oh my gosh.
And it turned out that it was just, there's a whole range of reasons I won't bore people with, but something really simple around the access and the control of that environment. And we're talking about live systems in airports and police departments and banks, and not just, forums for kids talking about games, but, really big systems, and breaches of tens, if not hundreds of millions of records. And what happened was a number of people found it at the same time, because it was such a big number of sites. that some enterprising person went and scripted up this process of logging in, doing a dump of the entire MongoDB environments and all the tables in there, and then blowing them away and putting a message saying, if you want to get your data back, put some money in this Bitcoin address. And I'm sure they cleaned up for a few people that did pay. But we're talking like nearly 50,000 and it was a period of like 2 or 3 days at the most when these were found, and then you could just script up looking for them. And I think the challenge of information security management, or ISM as we generally refer to it, you're right. You've got to start from your traditional legacy systems and the business practices you've got internally, and all the ITIL and COBIT-style frameworks and methodologies that come into that, and then build on top of it. So data science doesn't get a get-out-of-jail card just to behave badly. But at the same time, I think there's got to be some particular focus on what you're moving and why you're moving and how you collaborate. So particularly when you're moving it into, say, a SaaS-based platform like the Data Science Experience platform from IBM, where you might take some data from an existing system and move it up into IBM's cloud. You might have to apply some of your own governance and security controls, but you can then also assume to a certain point, but you want to double check that the configuration of your DSX account is going to meet your requirements internally, of your ISM requirements for your IT guys in the CIO's office, but also that you're kind of using the DSX's capabilities. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to collaborate. Next question for you then. It's a slightly over the long-term one as far as the topic of data. Things are moving so fast, and people talk about the amount of data that's been created in a very short period of time, and there's all this anecdotal discussion about how data is exploding. And when we look at things like the Internet of Things, there's plenty of evidence that if we put billions of sensors everywhere, we're going to end up with not just petabytes but exabytes of data. And I love the example of airplanes, are one of my favorite examples, where when the Dreamliner 787 came out, it was announced that each time the airplane flew, no matter how long the flight, on average it created 0.5 terabyte of data. And so I did some math, and it turned out there's 87,400 flights a day just in the domestic airspace in the USA alone. And so if you take 87,400 flights a day and basically divide it by half to get what 0.5 terabyte works out, that's 43.5 petabytes of data a day, assuming that every airplane was running the same sort of, BIOS, if you like, quote unquote, as the Dreamliner 787 some 6 years ago. Now, not to be outdone, Airbus went and created an aeroplane called the A330-1000, and it's got 10,000 sensors and produces 2.5 terabytes of data a day. So doing the same math of 87,400 flights a day just in the domestic airspace, you end up with 220 petabytes of raw data a day just of domestic flights in the US. So we know there is evidence of this Cambrian-like explosion of data. But I'm curious to sort of get your insight into, in short, where you think data is going to take us in the next year and a half, because in many ways, people ask me what this runaway freight train called data is going to do to the world. Are we going to just drown in it? Or are we going to have something similar to the IP address issue, where IP address space in IP version 4 just ran out, and now we're desperately trying to roll out IP version 6 from a 32-bit to a 64-bit address space? Where do you see us going in the next 12 to 18 months, or just around the general topic of data and what it's going to do to the world? And is it good? Is it bad? Is it indifferent?
Gosh. Okay, so when I originally saw this question, I thought about all the work that's being done in the deep learning space. And I don't know if you're familiar with TensorFlow. It's Google's deep learning library. Yeah, and so actually Google... the Google team is actually working with TensorFlow 2.0 now. They've already moved past TensorFlow. And a lot of new services are being offered that are driven by neural networks. And so for me, I think just seeing that there's just going to be an increasing amount of offerings that are driven from the work that's being done from deep learning. And related, I wanted to mention about bots. Because bots definitely are just becoming, and it's, bots are generally just a marriage between robotics and machine learning or artificial intelligence. But we actually, we bought our first bot for our house, I think 2 weeks ago, cleaning. Wow. Yeah, to clean, because we have a villa with lots of windows, and it cleans the windows, and so we would have to have cleaners come less often. And they've got reliable bots, that can now clean your windows. And, we're going to start having more and more like house cleaning bots and bots that can do this and that. And I think that it's just going to be a lot more in the next 12 to 18 months. It's going to be a continuation of all of the artificial intelligence driven innovations, like these bots, like the self-driving cars, all of the things that machine learning in action, and machine learning with robotics. I think we're just going to see more and more of that. And so that's a good thing because no one likes to wash windows. But then, it's also a bad thing. When we got this bot, I thought about, because my nanny, her daughter does our windows. And I thought, she's not going to be able to do our windows if we have the bot. And what will she do? So, I think the more automation comes in and cuts out jobs, the more it's going to be like a lingering concern, either like, oh, will I have a job, or, feeling bad because someone else doesn't have work because the bots, do a better job just because they're bots. And I think data is taking us in that direction. I think everyone pretty much feels it and knows it too.
It's an interesting quandary, isn't it? Because, I've got a similar challenge in that, looking at different things that we use around just day to day. Occasionally I do have pause or cause for pause, that is, a reason for pause to stop and say, should I go down this route? Because is it going to do someone other job? But it's in the example of your nanny's daughter and cleaning the window. I suspect that what you'll find is that the menial job of cleaning the window now will be transposed with something else that's a lot more interesting, and you'll probably still have the same spend on that individual doing something a bit more interesting, and they'll elevate further up the food chain, as it were, right?
That's true. Yeah.
I'm finding I'm spending more money now on humans the more technology I buy. It's quirky. And it caught me off guard because I had scenarios where, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but the number of things like your window cleaning bot where we started looking at technology to do things, whether it's sensors or software to automate things. And what I found was that I was using humans for less menial and just mind-numbingly boring stuff. But I was still actually spending the same, if not more, money on those humans to do slightly more interesting and fun things. And they were a lot happier as a result, which was kind of interesting. So I've got to spend a bit more time thinking about what that means long term. But I like the...
That's a nice perspective. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, because, if we think about you and I, for example, we sort of think, well, we're fairly high up in the food chain in what we do day to day. I'm more of an engineering background, but you're probably more of a mathematical statistical background. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about some of the, the top end of the food chain of folk who've got jobs that are going to be long lasting. But I do worry about the impact of that, particularly when we think about, it's when you mentioned bots, it immediately triggered this sort of thought between the two sides of the coin, and that is you've got your physical bot that's running around cleaning your windows, but you've also potentially got robotic process automation styled bots, or I don't think Siri or Google's AI is at that point yet, but at some point I suspect we'll have software bots that'll do really cool things for us. I wish they'd get here faster because I would certainly use them. But I know that, the robotic process automation, RPA, we've been using it for doing things like screen scraping, but it's getting much better at form filling and so forth. And
yeah, that's great stuff.
I love it when my browser fills in a form securely for me, but I wish it would then do all the typing as well. And it was interesting, your comment around TensorFlow, and I think, there's a number of platforms like that. But I really big fan of TensorFlow. I love the fact that in the design and the architecture of TensorFlow, each of the nodes in the graph are effectively little, operations in their own sense. And so you've got this mathematical business logic built into the graph at each node level. And sort of when you build a flow, as data's moving around that flow, it moves in different ways depending on the type of data and the reason the data is there and the time and date and so forth. I love the idea that in the next 12 or 18 months, we're going to go from building what I call data swamps, because I think a lot of people are just building these data lakes that just end up being a massive quagmire of unknown stuff that we'll never get to, and hopefully we'll just delete at some point. I think we're going to get, look at cars, autonomous vehicles. I was reading a thing the other day, I think it was Tesla put out a paper or something, but someone published a paper saying that their autonomous vehicle produces like 4.5 petabytes of raw data a day, and sonar and LiDAR and Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, how the hell are we going to store that? But the reality is we're not going to store it, are we? We're just going to process it and just keep metadata and whatever we need for tracking and so forth.
Well, I like the whole thing, with the IoT technologies and the built-in applications on the IoT devices, which have a trigger. They can run some applications on device, and then if a certain threshold is met, then the data is sent back up to the command center. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, don't collect everything, but then just don't throw everything away. At least automate some sort, a filter of what to keep.
Yeah, I think a few people have been struggling to get a coinage for it. Cisco came up with sort of fog computing, which I really don't like a lot. I think a number of companies have this concept of edge analytics. I don't know that we necessarily have a coinage that suits it yet, but I totally agree with you in that we're going to have to move to where the data is. I had this phrase a while ago that I didn't create. I borrowed it from someone, but I can't find the source of it, unfortunately, to quote them. But it was around this idea of the gravity of data. And when we think about how planets are formed, for example, and particles of dust and dirt accrete and eventually end up with these planets, basically, and planets end up with gravity, and we can stand on the surface and not get flung off into space. I often think about data in that sense, and I look for where's the center of gravity on a particular data set, and I look at whether I need to put my intelligence and engineering and business logic at the center of that universe of data, or whether I need to put it at the edge, and oftentimes it's a bit of both, right? We're going to have to put some smarts in the cars as they move around, but as you said, and sometimes we're going to have to take it back to a command center and keep it there for various reasons, or even share it. Now, before we wrap up, I've got... Oh, sorry, yeah, go.
I was just going to say, I think it all comes back to, like, when you're saying all this, it just reminds me of an analogy one of my systems design teacher said, was like, don't get so caught looking at the bark of the trees that you can't see your way out of the forest. And that made so much sense to me. Yeah, like every single problem that we're trying to solve, the whatever solution we build has to be centered around solving that problem. It's so easy with all of this data and all of these interesting things we can find out to get distracted, but like that's just never going to work. It has to be, solution centered. Like every approach needs to be centered, targeted, laser targeted on what is our objective here.
I like that. Actually, on a call this morning with IBM's team around the event coming up next week in Munich, Hilary Mason made a really great comment along those lines as well that I made a note of, and that is that she said a lot of data science is not about the technology. It's not always a technical problem. It's a people thing, or it's a business thing, and you're oftentimes trying to understand the data and the cause, the source of the data, and the problem you're solving for the business, and the technology comes after that. Whereas I think a lot of noise we're hearing around the place versus the signal, particularly in media and the great unwashed media who really don't understand what they're talking about and data science, talk about the technology aspects or the brands or the makes and models and manufacturers, and they forget that at the end of the day it's about people. It's about things that people want to do and people inside companies or consumers or people that want the celebrity experience for some reason. And that data just follows them, or because I have this view that data only comes from two places. It's either we create it from afresh, or we capture it from somewhere. I think they're the only two ways that data come about. You either create it or you capture it. But when you think about some of the challenges that we face, I certainly like the idea that they're not always technical problems. They're invariably not technical problems. Technology often gets in the way. I like your bark versus the tree thing. It's very much a Burnham Wood Shakespearean quote, tweaked in many ways, and not being able to see the wood for the trees, right? That leads me into the sort of my favorite pun that I've been playing with, and that is at what's on the horizon, and the IBM folk are going to love that one. For you personally...
You are a true nerd, aren't you, Dez?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, and you're so goofy. It's really refreshing, actually. I'm such a serious person, and every time I come across you on Twitter, I'm like... I just feel like a sense of relief because you're just witty.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you. I do try. What's on the horizon for you personally? So, I mean, you've got an amazing background. Just a huge fan of what you do. I love the fact that you seem to give 10 times more than you take from the universe. What's coming up for you personally? I mean, obviously we're going to be catching up in a week's time at Munich at the event with the IBM team and this whole thing around, machine learning and so forth, and the data science challenge. As far as the Fast Track Your Data event on June the 22nd goes in Munich, but where is Lillian Pierson in 12 to 18 months, and where would you like to see yourself? Where do you think you'll be, and what sort of fun challenges would you like to take on the next year or so?
Nice. Actually, okay, so now that you phrased the question, when I saw this question originally, I thought, okay, well, I'm doing this and that and this and that. And it's true. I have a deep learning course I'm coming out with, and a natural language processing course, and chatbot course, and data science marketing course.
How do people find out about those, just to get them a good plug?
So those are all on LinkedIn
Tell me more
Learning.
about those. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like I have a recommendation systems course that's coming out in a few weeks. I've got a bunch of courses I've been working on with them, and so that's I'm going to continue doing that. I really like that work. It's fun.
When do they come out? When are they available?
Okay, so the deep learning course should be out in October. The recommendation systems course is coming out in July, and then natural language processing is going to be January. So, and then chatbots next year. And I'm coaching, and I also have like live training events I do all over the place, mostly in Dubai. Yeah, so it's fun, but really, I really want to have so many online courses, and none of them are up right now for my brand, because I'm wanting to make them, these amazing, just orchestrate this amazing experience for all the learners. And in 12 to 18 months, I'd like to have all of my courses up, and I don't know, just have everything kind of streamlined for my business, where I could spend more time on consulting work and less time on product develop, like building courses. I think that's in 12 or 18 months, that's where I'd like to be. I'm working more.
You've got quite a collection of courses already, though, from memory. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but off the top of my head, I mean, you've got, is it 7 or 8? You've got data science, analytics, you've got Python data science, recommendation systems. You've got intros to like data science and R. You've got some stuff on deep learning and natural language processing. But I think some of these are future times. Are they? Are they all online now?
Yeah, some of them are future. They're going to come out like in the next 12 or 18 months. And then some of them, I have a lot of courses that are just, I took everything down, because as I've created more courses, I've learned more about instructional design,
right,
and about how to make an experience for the learner. And so I really just, I felt like I wanted to redo my courses to make them better. So I took everything down, and it's just been a lot of content development for a long time. And I love it, but I'm ready to do some more consulting work. And I think it's going to take a while to get there, where I have things kind of tidied away, but maybe in 12 or 18 months, yeah, I can be doing more consulting work. And less content development.
I suspect I'm going to find some reasons to get you to come to Australia. Is there a particular area that you want to consult into? Are there particular niche verticals around the markets? I mean, is it in banking and wealth management, finance, or aged care and health and so forth? Marketing, yeah?
Yeah, marketing. I'm mostly interested in marketing. Yeah, direct marketing and just marketing in general.
And TVC, print, radio, digital, online, any particular space in marketing there, just out of interest?
I think digital and online.
Right.
Yeah.
It's in your DNA. Well, look, it's been an absolute...
Yeah, I think it's in your DNA also.
Oh, it is definitely in my DNA. And in fact, I like to rewrite my DNA every 18 months so I'm still relevant. Look, we could speak for hours, but we're coming up on the hour now, and I know that it's getting very late there, and it's about 1:15 here in the morning in Sydney. I'm gonna wrap it up there, but I just wanted to say a big thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic talking to you. I really appreciate the fact that you were able to jump in the studio with me at very short notice. I think it was less than 60 minutes that you pinged me back in both a DM on Twitter and an email, and thank you so much for that. And it's been great fun. I look forward to meeting in person finally in Munich. And I'd love to do a follow-up one after the event and just get your thoughts on the event itself. But look, thanks so much for your time, and I really, really appreciate it, and hopefully you've had some fun as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me, Dez.
Oh, not at all. And we'll do it again soon. Lillian Pierson, just quick last plug for your website. Your website is data-mania.com. People can follow you on Twitter as Big Data Gal. And is there anywhere else that you want people to find you to find about your website and your business and your online courses?
So I'm on LinkedIn at Lillian Pierson, and I'm on Instagram at Big Data Gal. But I'm pretty easy to find. So yeah, mostly I just LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and my blog.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. Folks, we're going to wrap it up there. It's been great fun, and I look forward to doing it again with you soon.
Thank you, Des.
Cheers.